Making connections, realism to post-impressionism. The 19th century gave rise to innovative new artistic styles and techniques. Artists responded to the technological advancements of the Industrial Revolution in different ways. Some artists strove for photographic realism in their work, others rebelled against the modern age by deliberately cultivating a more expressive, imaginative style. Comparing and contrasting artworks of different styles help us better understand their significance. The impact of photography on painting. In 1837, French artist and inventor Louis Daguerre produced the first permanent photographic image called the daguerreotype. This new medium opened up a wealth of possibilities for artists. Photography helped painters, for example, to translate the three-dimensional world into two dimensions, yet some artists and critics rejected photography as a legitimate artistic medium, believing that it circumvented the traditional creative process. Those artists searched for more expressive styles and based their work on fantasy and imagination. The influence of photography. Winslow Homer was widely admired for his realist style. He painted honest and lifelike Civil War scenes that did not romanticize or embellish the miseries of war. Impressionist painter Edgar Degas used the camera as a tool in the painting process. He based each of the ballerinas and 4 dancers on photographs that he took of models in different poses. Impressionist Claude Monet did not aim for photographic realism in his paintings. Rather, he recorded his impression of a scene with paint on canvas. Post-Impressionist Paul Gauguin believed that the artist should synthesize his direct observations of nature with his emotional response to what he saw, rather than attempt to precisely record on canvas his observations of the real world. Post-Impressionist Vincent van Gogh was not concerned with making paintings that resembled photographs. He used bold color and expressive brushstrokes to capture his emotional response to a scene. Impressionist Mary Cassatt painted traditional scenes of mother and child, yet her style was far from photographic in nature. She filled her carefully planned compositions with loose, expressive strokes of vibrant color. French sculptor Auguste Rodin modeled figures in unconventional poses and infused them with emotion and expression. He combined a rigorous study of human anatomy with his own thoughtful imagination to create deeply moving figures. Japanese influence of European art. In 1867, Japanese woodblock prints were unveiled at the Paris World's Fair, creating quite a stir within the French Impressionist community. Master printmakers of the ukiyo-e, the floating world school, in Japan portrayed quiet scenes of everyday life in striking, highly decorative ways. Ukiyo-e prints celebrated the fleeting pleasures of life. The Impressionists who studied those works were excited to discover such a different way of depicting transit moments with universal themes. And here again is Woman Grimacing in Mirror at Baby on Floor by Kitagawa Utamaro. Mother combing her child's hair? Think of how Marie Cassatt's painting, Mother Combing Her Child's Hair, shows the influence of Japanese woodblock prints. Select Reveal to see suggested answers. As a Japanese woodblock print, Cassatt depicts a scene that captures a fleeting moment in everyday life. She used diagonal lines, a raised vantage point, and a mirror's reflection to draw the viewer's eye into the painting. She placed the figures off-center in an asymmetric composition, while her limited color palette throughout the scene creates a sense of unity. Think of how Edgar Degas' painting 4 Dancers shows the influence of Japanese woodblock prints. Degas used expressive, short brushwork rather than the bold, flat colors found in Japanese prints, but his work resembles ukiyo-e prints in many respects. Dark outlines emphasize the figures, while vibrant patterns creates visual interest. The asymmetrical composition places the cropped figures off-center, and the strong diagonals focus the viewer's attention. La Orana Maria. Think of how Paul Gauguin's painting La Orana Maria shows the influence of Japanese woodblock prints. Similar to Japanese woodblock prints, Gauguin used flat areas of color with little shading. He added patterning in the clothing and the foliage to create visual interest. He created an asymmetrical composition by placing the main figure off-center and on a strong diagonal. Subject matter. 19th century European and American artists created works that reflected the cultural and political climate of the time. French Impressionists such as Pierre-Auguste Renoir and Georges Seurat depicted samples of modern Parisian life in a newly industrialized society, while American artists such as Henrietta Tanner and Mary Cassatt painted intimate genre scenes of daily life. Many 19th century artists could not count on regular financial support from wealthy patrons, the aristocracy, or the church, and yet some artists were fiercely dedicated innovators who broke ground with new styles and techniques that were not widely embraced by critics. A case in point is Vincent van Gogh, who sold just one painting during his lifetime. Explore 19th century subject matter activity on the next screen. Comparing art from realism to post-impressionism, 19th century subject matter. French printmaker, painter, and set designer Louis Daguerre discovered a way to capture permanent photographic images. He used a camera to record carefully arranged still life compositions. American realist painter Winslow Homer was sent to the front lines in Virginia during the Civil War, where he made lifelike sketches of soldiers and battle scenes. He used those images to create documentary paintings, such as Prisoners from the Front. French realist Jean-François Millet painted rustic genre scenes that captured the rugged life of peasants at work in the French countryside. American realist Henry Asawa Tanner focused on genre scenes of contemporary African-American life. French Impressionist Pierre-Auguste Renoir and Post-Impressionist Georges Seurat depicted scenes of modern Parisian life, capturing the leisure activities of a newly industrialized French society. French post-impressionist artists Paul Cézanne and Vincent van Gogh used bold color and expressive brushstroke work to illustrate landscape scenes. French post-impressionist artist Paul Gauguin employed line, shape, and color to combine his direct observations of nature with his imagination to create symbolic, religious imagery. Defining space. 19th century artists employed a variety of techniques to create convincing space in their paintings. Some artists manipulated the size and scale of objects in the foreground and background to create the illusion of 3 dimensions. Others relied on the interplay of warm and cool colors, causing some areas to appear to recede and others to advance into the foreground. Explore creating the illusion of space. Remember, this painting is called Plowing in the Nivernais, The Dressing of the Vines by Rosa Bonheur. Creating the illusion of space. How do Rosa Bonheur and Jean-François Millet create convincing space in their respective paintings? Both artists depict foreground objects as larger than objects in the background. Millet paints the late sun raking across the figures, which give them a sense of sculptural solidity. The shadowy figures stand out against the golden setting. Bonheur creates depth by depicting the animals as moving along the sloping diagonal pathway, which recedes into the distance. How does Henrietta Tanner create a convincing sense of space in The Thankful Poor? Tanner employed dark and light values to create a convincing sense of space. The bright sunlight reflects off the back wall and creates a striking contrast against the boy's thick umber hair and the man's dark silhouette. How do Edgar Degas and Marie Cassatt create a sense of space in their respective paintings? Both artists use an asymmetrical composition, strong diagonal lines, and a high vantage point to draw the viewer into the space. How did Georges Seurat create a sense of space in his painting, A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte? Seurat pioneered a technique called pointillism, which involves placing tiny dots of pure color next to each other on the canvas. When the painting is viewed from a distance, the viewer's eye mixes the colors together. Girot created volume and the illusion of space by placing these dabs of pure color in just the right proportions to create dark and light values. How did Paul Cézanne create convincing space in his painting Mont Sainte-Victoire? Cézanne understood that cool colors tend to recede on the canvas, while warm colors advance. He created the illusion of depth by using pale, cool blues for the mountain and the sky. The colors gradually transition from cool to warm as they approach the foreground, which is a rich mixture of yellow-oranges and greens, warmed by the addition of yellow. The human figure. From extraordinary realism to fantastical expression, 19th century artists illustrated the human form in a variety of ways. Some depicted lifelike bodies in natural settings, while others relied on personal feelings and imagination to craft bold figures filled with emotion and expression. Which do you prefer, lifelike representations of the figure or imaginative renderings? Auguste Rodin relied on his imagination as well as historical accounts to create the complex composition of expressive figures in the Bergers of Calais. Painting the figure, pioneers from the front and the thankful four. What is one similarity and one difference between the figures in Winslow Homer's Pioneer from the Front and those in Henry Sawatanner's The Thankful Poor? Both artists painted in the realist style and showed a figure in strong profile. A difference: Homer used a natural palette to emphasize the figure's expression. Tanner employed dramatic light and shadow to create drama and the illusion of three-dimensional form. What are some similarities in the ways that Rosa Bonheur and Jean-François Millet depict the figures in their paintings? Both artists were naturalists. Their paintings show workers laboring in the field, set with sweeping landscape compositions. The poses are active and the figures are cast in relative shadow, which creates an anonymous feeling. What are some similarities between the figures in Edgar Degas' Four Dancers and the figures in Mary Cassatt's Mother Combing Her Child's Hair? Cassatt and Degas used expressive brushstrokes to build the illusion of form on the canvas. Both artists used dark outlines on certain areas of their figures. They included more detail and depicted a greater sense of solidity in their figures' faces than in their clothing and the setting, which receive a looser treatment. What are one similarity and one difference between Paul Gauguin's La Orana Maria and Edvard Munch's The Scream? Similarities. Both artists infused their subjects with imagination and personal experience. They used bold colors and did not seek to create lifelike human forms. Differences. Gauguin created organic shapes filled with flat patches of color, while Munch used thick, expressive brushstrokes to build up his figures. What are one similarity and one difference between the ways that Pierre-Auguste Renoir and Georges Seurat painted people? Similarities. Both artists painted groups of figures engaged in casual leisure activities. Neither artist was concerned with photographic realism. Difference. Renoir used light touches and velvety brushstrokes to give depth to his forms. The figures have a soft, diffused quality about them. Seurat used tiny dabs of pure color to create solid-looking figures in space. Color palette. One of the most intriguing advances in 19th century European painting was the innovative way that artists treated color. Innovations began with the Impressionists, who placed dabs of pure color on canvas to capture their impressions of the fleeting objects of natural light. Artists of the post-impressionist and symbolist styles took the bold impressionist palette to new heights. Post-impressionists and symbolists used pure, vibrant colors to paint what they felt, creating more personal and emotional images. Painting techniques. 19th century painters also experimented with innovative ways to apply their bold, vibrant colors to the canvas. Compared to the refined, detailed strokes of realist painters, Impressionists and Post-Impressionists pushed expressive brushwork in new directions. They applied dabs of pure pigment, laid down thick impasto slashes of color, and experimented with opaque and transparent paint effects. Bonheur was skilled at rendering subtle textures and forms on canvas, from the fine fur and sinewy musculature of the oxen to the clumps of tilled soil. She captured extraordinary naturalistic details. Tanner used thick, dramatic brushstrokes to give his subjects a sense of three-dimensional form on the canvas. He rendered the figures and objects in the room with careful detail, using looser brushstrokes to suggest the color and light of the wall and curtain. Monet did not mix his paint on a palette, rather he applied dabs of pure pigment directly to the canvas. Instead of outlining objects with dark colors, he used lively brushstrokes and bold colors to convey images. Cassatt applied a vibrant Impressionist color palette using loose brushstrokes of paint or pure pastel pigment. Cézanne applied his paints to canvas with varied yet deliberate brushstrokes, thick, thin, smooth, and rough, and in some cases, larger areas of flat shades. In a technique called pointillism, Seurat placed tiny dots of pure color next to each other on the canvas. When seen from a distance, the viewer's eye mixes the colors together and sees the illusion of solid forms in the canvas. Light and shadow. Painters of this period experimented with new ways of capturing the effects of light on objects. Realist painters such as Tanner used expressive brushstrokes to indicate warm highlights and dark shadows. Claude Monet and other Impressionists relied on dabs of pure color to capture the fleeting impression of what they saw, while Post-Impressionists, including Georges Seurat and Paul Cézanne, sought to make their paintings look more solid with light and shadow. Explore light and shadow. How does Tanner use the contrast of light and dark in The Thankful Poor? Tanner used light and shadow to create a pious mood. Sunlight streaming through the window casts luminous highlights across the head, shoulders, and weathered hands of the elderly man. A beautiful glowing light on the face of the young boy reveals an expression of quiet thanksgiving. Light dances across the pottery on the table and disappears with the deep folds of the tablecloth. How does Monet express light and dark in Water Lily Pond? Monet used saturated hues of red, violet, green, and ochre to capture the sunlight dancing across the water. Warm light tones suggest the sun reflecting on the arch of the bridge, which stands in stark contrast to the dense, shadowy foliage in the background. Small flecks of paint capture the shimmering highlights on the wispy plants. How does Renoir use the contrast of light and dark in Le Moulin de la Jalette? Instead of blending paint on the canvas, Renoir applied soft, diffused brushstrokes to capture the sunlight and shadows dancing across the figures. He created rich shadows with the colors of surrounding objects, rather than using neutral browns and blacks. Quiz time! Impressionists Edgar Degas and Post-Impressionists Paul Gauguin were influenced by Japanese woodblock prints. How did Degas and Gauguin borrow elements from the prints differently? Both Degas and Gauguin used vibrant patterning, but Gauguin incorporated Japanese flat areas of color, while Degas used expressive brushwork. Question 2. What is one similarity in the subject matter depicted in the paintings of French Impressionist Pierre-Auguste Renoir and those of Post-Impressionist Georges Seurat? Both Renoir and Seurat depicted leisurely scenes of modern Parisian life. Which of the following statements best describes a similarity between the approaches to painting of symbolist Edvard Munch and Post-Impressionist Paul Gauguin? Both Munch and Gauguin infused their paintings with imagination, emotion, and personal experience.